416. We were talking about, we started talking about the Hebrew slave, who's really a Hebrew hired hand. And he comes to work for the guy for 6 years. This is a guy who stole. There, one way there, he could either have stolen or and it was sold by the Beis Din, or he sells himself. A guy got to the point where he was so poor that he had to sell himself off. Now, the Torah then says in Pasuk Daled. Now, this is a strange halacha. It's a strange halacha, and you have to understand where it's coming from. The Torah says like this: Im Adona v'yiten lo isha, 2 lines on the bottom. If the master gives him a wife, and we're talking about a non-Jewish Canaanite servant girl who's living on the property of the master, v'yolda lo banim o banos, isha, she has sons, or she bears him sons or daughters. Ha'isha v'yiladeha tia ladoneh. The woman and her children belong to the master. V'hu yetze bigapo. He leaves alone. So the Torah says that a man who has stolen and is sold, so we mentioned yesterday how the master, if this guy is married, the master has to now support not only him, but him and his wife and children for 6 years. He buys him, and now he has to support the Jewish man and his wife and his children. If he is married, the master can give him a single girl. Everybody take Chumashim, guys. Take Chumashim, page 416. The master could give him a single girl, a single Canaanite woman, and he produces children with her. And then these children, who are now have Canaanite status, they belong to the master, because the master is allowed to own slaves. He's allowed to own Canaanite slaves. After 6 years, the Jewish man leaves, and the wife, the Canaanite woman, and her children, they stay with the master. Okay, that clear. Now, just one side note here, or one side point, is that a single man who is sold as a slave, a single man, Jewish man who stole, and then he's sold, the master may not give him a Canaanite wife, a Canaanite woman. Only a married man is allowed to be given the Canaanite woman. Now, why is that? What sense does that make? Why is it that if the Jewish guy is married, so then he can be forced meaning he's got an obligation, if the master wants him to live with this woman, to live with her and produce children. Whereas if he is single, then he's not allowed to, according to halacha. Why not?
Because then he'll be attached to this slave woman.
Oh, so one of the ideas is that the single guy should not be starting his marriage career with a non-Jewish woman. At the end of the day, she's not Jewish. And again, this is a waiver. This is a waiver that the Torah makes under these circumstances only, that he's allowed to he's allowed to live with his Canaanite woman. So a single man, the Torah does not want him to start his marriage career with a non-Jewish woman. That the marriage career should be make the attachment with his a Jewish wife. Okay. There's a practical reason here. That's a very nice reason, and and it's certainly an important reason. There's a practical reason. You see, I told you yesterday, if there be a yeshiva guy who's for sale for 6 years, Sam's on the market, right? I'll take him. 6 years, he could put up my sukkah, mow the lawn. What'll it cost me? Some room and board. I can't make him do degrading work. I'm not allowed to make him polish my shoes or carry my towel to the bathhouse. You're not allowed to do something that you would be allowed to do with a non-Jewish slave. Skilled labor, what we call regular profession, what you'd hire somebody for, that you are allowed to do. A single guy who's for sale, Beis Din says, listen, he stole $2,000. Anybody wants to pay $2,000, you get him for 6 years. Make a calculation. 2,000 divided by 6 is, what is it, 333 $333 a year, room and board, plus room and board. It's a good deal to have an extra pair of hands around the house. What about a married guy with 7 children and his wife? Who wants to take that on? I told you, you have enough trouble supporting your own family. You got to go support this guy's family too. So the Torah says there's a financial incentive. What's the financial incentive? You could give him the Canaanite woman to live with him, and that will then you own those Canaanites, those children, who are now Canaanite slaves, which you have a right to then trade. It becomes a financial incentive. There's another reason, by the way, that I saw the commentary say, if a man steals, a married man steals, often, not always, but it may very well be because his wife was pushing him to live at a higher standard than he could afford. The wife is, she's high maintenance, as they say. And she's pushing him. That's the expression they use. She's high maintenance. And since she's high maintenance, so this guy at a certain point, he couldn't take the pressure, and he went and he stole. Her punishment is the embarrassment of her knowing, or everybody else knowing, that her husband is now living with a Canaanite slave. And that's her punishment. That's what some of the Mefarshim say. So the whole idea here is an idea of, the Torah is very practical. You'll see all over the Torah. The Torah is extremely practical. It's when there's even things that sound a little bit off the mark to us. If you start thinking about it, you'll see how practical the Torah is. Very, very practical. Number one. Number two, one of the classic Hasidic commentaries says, who ultimately, an Eved Ivri means the Hebrew servant. I told you, to translate it as a slave, even though it's called an Eved, to translate it as a slave is a bit of a mystery. He's really a Hebrew hired hand. And I mentioned yesterday that whatever food you eat, he has to eat. If you eat steak, he eats steak. If you sleep on two pillows, you have to treat. So much so that the Gemara says somebody who buys a Hebrew slave has bought a master for himself. So think twice before you do it. Nowadays, the law doesn't apply, but in the old days, if you bought him, you have to treat him a certain way, because at the end of the day, he's a Jew. Now, who ultimately is a Hebrew servant? Who's the ultimate Hebrew servant?
All of us.
All of us. All of us. And we are Hebrew servants. We have to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when it says 6 years and on the seventh he goes free, that alludes to the 7 decades of the average lifespan, which is Yemei Shnosenu Behem Shivim Shana. The pasuk says the average lifespan is 70 years. V'im B'gvuro Shmonim Shana. If a person is a little stronger, he goes to 80 years. I told you statistically, women outlive men. We don't know why that is, Jeremy. We have a few guesses, but we don't know why that is. And I told you that married men live longer than single men. The studies have shown married men live longer than single men, but that married men are more willing to give up their lives. That's not true, by the way. It's just that's what they say. Who they is, I'm not sure either. That's what they say, right? When their wives aren't around to hear it. So at the end of the day, that's it. So the 6 years and then the 7th year he goes free alludes to the Hebrew servant who serves for those decades, and in the 7th decade that he goes free. That means that he's finished his job. So he could go up to 8 decades, but that's what it alludes to. Now, the way the Gemara puts it, now stay with this now. The Gemara says an Eved Ivri serves his master by day and by night. By day, he does whatever work he has to be doing, and at night he impregnates the Canaanite servant if the master gives him the Canaanite servant. So the way the Gemara uses it, the Gemara says in Eved Ivri, he serves his master by day and by night. Now, we know that day and night represent 2 different stages. Day represents when everything is good, the sun is shining, everybody's in a good mood, everybody's happy, everything is good. Nighttime represents ordeals, exile, challenges, when things are not so good. Then a person is said to be night. Elie Wiesel's first book was called Night. It's dark, it's bleak, and nothing's going well. That's nighttime. The Eved Ivri serves God by day and by night symbolically means that we serve God when things are going well, and we have to serve God when things are a little challenging also. Everybody's wonderful when I feel good, and there's no financial pressure. I don't know if you ever get to no financial pressure. There's less financial pressure, and the kids are doing well in school, and supper is ready when you come. Nobody nicer. That's no challenge. And if you feel good, What about when, the chips are down a little bit and so somebody's giving you a hassle and one of the kids is in trouble yet again, there's a call from the principal and, the bills are piling up. And then that's the real challenge. We have to serve God under those circumstances, even if they're extreme, like in the Holocaust. If you want to read a powerful book on the Holocaust, probably the real book on the Holocaust, which is worth reading, is something called Responsa from the Holocaust. We might even have it here in the library. What Jews did in the concentration camps under the most extreme circumstances, trying to find a sitter to daven, and trying to avoid eating non-kosher food, and trying to smuggle in a page or two of Gemara so that they could learn, and all the things they did when the chips were really down. That's an Eved who's serving Hashem during the day and during the night. That's real service at Kodesh Baruch Hu. Obviously, we have to do it all the time. That's what the Torah is emphasizing. You will find, when you get married, somebody is going to give you well-meaning but very poor advice. And they're going to tell you, never go to sleep upset with each other. Work it out before you go to sleep. Did you hear that before you got married? Anybody tell you that?
We never fight, Rabbi.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Did you ever read that book about telling the truth? Right, I think so we don't either. We don't fight. We discuss. We discuss. We don't argue. We discuss. Okay. So if somebody's going to give you well-meaning advice, like never go to sleep. It's usually your uncle, who's been divorced 3 times. You listen to me, kid. Now listen to me. Don't you go to sleep at night. You work it out. You hear me? That's what you ought to do. You work it out. Well, it's a bad piece of advice, because when you're at night, you're tired, you're cranky, you're very sensitive, and no matter what happens, and what could be worked out quickly could turn into a 2-hour slugfest with her ending up crying. So you're much better off just saying, listen, we're upset, just go to sleep. Then you work out in the morning in 10 minutes. In 10 minutes is all. You feel better, she feels better, have a cup of coffee, you apologize, Shalom Yisrael. It's all worked out. That's how it works. You always apologize, by the way. You always get used to that. You're no matter what happens, you're going to end up apologizing. So at night, go to sleep. It all looks different in the morning. Then you find out, it's not the despair that you think it is. The Torah is telling you, I want to tell you a story. This is documented. There was a couple, they got married, and 3 months after the wedding, true story, a from couple got married. 3 months after the wedding, they were in a car accident, and the husband, his brain stem was shattered. So he was turned into a medical, what they call a vegetable. He was on a respirator in the hospital, absolutely no chance of recovery. So, in halacha, you can't pull plugs. You may not have to intervene, you may not have to active intervention to extend the life, but you can't do anything to terminate the life. So this went on, and it went on, and the doctors asked the doctors, what's the prognosis? The doctor said it could be indefinite. It could go on for years. So at a certain point, the wife decided, now she's fully married, and he can't divorce her. He can't give her a get because he's not, and there's no get by proxy. She's what's called a living aguna. She's got no husband, for theoretically, she's got no non-functional husband, but she can't marry anybody else because she's obviously, he's still her husband. So she she started going to medical school. She had to make a life for herself. She went to medical school once a week. In the beginning, she would come every day to the hospital. Once a week, she would come in and sit with her husband for 10 minutes. And she would once a week. She'd go in for 10 minutes, and she'd sit there, and then she would leave once a week. She finished medical school, so imagine how much time this is going on. And then she started working as a doctor. And then one day she came in to visit her husband, and while she was visiting him, she recognized that he was having a heart attack. Because of her medical training, she could tell he was having a heart attack. And now she had a choice. She could either push the button for assistance to help, do CPR, keep him alive, or she could just sit there and do nothing and be released from this living Gehenna. So without a moment's hesitation, she pushed the button to start applying CPR, and then the staff came and they kept him alive. Then she went to Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein, Rabbi Yasha's son-in-law, who is one of the biggest medical poskim, one of the biggest poskim in general. And she went to Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein. She asked him if she was obligated to do that. So Rabbi Zilberstein said that the Torah says, Lo samod al dam reyacha. You're not allowed to stand by while your fellow man, Jew, is dying. Lo samod, stand on, literally, you're not allowed to stand on your fellow's blood. And the Torah does not distinguish between a healthy person and an unhealthy person. If a Jew is dying, you have to try to save his life. And they said to her, no one whose ancestors did not stand at Har Sinai to receive the Torah would have been capable of doing that, of passing that test. That was the story. So I told this story to my kids when they were real little. I told this story to my kids at Shalashudas. Shalashudas is when things are, the lights are dimming and it's a little more spiritual. I told this story to my kids, and of course they're looking at me like this. And I made one mistake. My mother happened to be there. My parents were there at the time. These are her grandchildren. Me, she relinquished ownership of me many years ago. The grandchildren she likes. So the kids are a little bit, gets a little bit spooked. And my mother looks at me, and they're really little time. My mother looks at me from across the table. She goes, and then, right, like where's the happy ending? Because I want my grandchildren to have a happy ending. Hear a happy ending over here. So I said, that was the happy ending. It's not the ending we would have written. The happy ending is that a Jewish man, women, a Jew realizes that they have to do what Hashem wants them to do at all times. It's not the ending we would have written to the story. Boy, was she upset with me. It's not the ending we would have written to the story. But I wanted my kids to hear that, that life doesn't always work out the way we want it to. And a person has to know that under certain circumstances, you may be on a plane and they forget your kosher meal. Now what? Well, now I could eat non-kosher food because anyway, it's another 7 hours of flight. No, you're going to have to eat apples and bananas for the next 12 hours or whatever it is, because that's how we serve a Torah. It's easy to serve when things are going. What about when things are not going well? What about when you got to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning with your baby for the third night in a row, and you feel like saying so, you're cranky and you're tired, and you have to learn to restrain yourself. It's not so easy. It's not always easy. That's the first one. The second story, I tell you, it was in 2003, and I got into a cab. A little Israeli cab driver had a yarmulke on, and we started driving on the highway, and this car cuts us off. There's something really. So I just kind of said to the cab, I just muttered to the cab driver, probably an Arab. So he looks at me, he goes, I know them a little better than you do. So I could smell a story coming. I said, yeah, why, right? So he told me that in the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, he was on the Golan Heights with his unit. The unit was overrun on the first day of the war. They were annihilated, decimated. He and 7 other guys were taken as prisoners of war by the Syrians, and he was a prisoner of war for 1 year, 6 months, and 3 days. And I remember because it was 30 years to the day. He said they applied electric shocks, they tortured him, put him in solitary confinement. And then one day, he didn't know it, but the Israelis and the Syrians had worked out a prisoner exchange. There were these 8 guys in exchange for about 1,500 Syrian prisoners. And he didn't know about that. He only knew they came into his cell. The Syrians knew what was going to happen. They came into his cell 3 days before the exchange. They opened up his back with a commando knife with no anesthesia, and they inserted a tracking device because they were going to send him back to an Israeli base. He knew that they would be going to an Israeli base, so they wanted to be able to track things. And then 3 days later, while I was in agony, they suddenly came into the cell and they said, okay, put on your clothes, you're going home in 15 minutes. In the meantime, they had told him that Israel had been destroyed. And he had no way of knowing. He saw his unit overrun, so he had no way of knowing, and he was in prison. He didn't know what was going on. He came back to Israel. He never got any reparations from the military because the military's approach on these things is you should have died fighting. So he wasn't treated as a returning hero, got no reparations from the army. And here he is 30 years later driving a not very good cab, but he's a religious Jew. He's still serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That means that sometimes you have to serve. Things are difficult, but you still have to serve. That's what it means. A Hebrew servant, an Eved Ivri serves by day and by night. You have to serve even when things are difficult. And that's really the test. That's the test for us. It's easy to be frum. It's easy to be frum when things are going well. But what happens if it's Shabbos and the lights? I remember one Shabbos in our house, it was hot, and there was the power went out. And I told my kids, look, and I'm very much bothered by the heat. I told my kids, look, there is a leniency under certain circumstances where you could ask a non-Jew to go turn on the air conditioning for you. On the other hand, it'd be better to, what would you like to do? I asked the kids, and I'm silently hoping they say, yeah, Dad, get the. They said, no, we're okay with this. Right? And then you have to go. You have to grin and bear it. There are things happen. Things happen on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. Okay, listen. That's the test. Okay. Now, what do you do with this guy? So it says he leaves on his own. Page 418. What if he doesn't want to leave? Top line, Vim, Omar Yomar ha'eved ahavti es adoni es ishti es my. What if the guy says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, the non-Jewish servant woman. Lo eitzei chofshi, I don't want to go free. So what do we do with him then? V'gisho adonav el Elohim, he brings him to the Beis Din. V'gisho el hadelas al mezuzah, they bring him to the door or the doorpost. They don't actually put it the doorpost. They just teach us the door. He's done standing up. V'rotza adonav esazdo b'martzeya, they drill his ear. V'avodo la'olam, and then he has to serve for good. And serving for good doesn't mean literally la'olam. It means until when? Till the Yovel. He has to serve until the Yovel year. So they put his ear up against a door, and they drill him. You know, in our day and age, I don't know if anybody here has had their ears pierced, but yeah, I would imagine that ear piercing nowadays is probably not that painful. You know, in those days, I don't know what kind of drill. You know, some sort of some sort of rusty crank that they got him up against the door. I don't know exactly what it looked like. Now, what's the idea of drilling his ear? Why are they drilling his ear into there? Which is obviously, so it's a somewhat degrading to have the ear drilled. And why the door? Why is the ear drilled and why the door? So Rashi brings down the ear that heard the command not to steal, which he did, and the ear that heard God say, you are my servants and not servants to other servants. And this guy is willingly choosing to become a servant to somebody else as opposed to God. Obviously, he's got to keep all the halachas, by the way. That's also part of the issue over here. The master hasn't given him time to daven and to learn daf yomi or whatever it is that he's got all the halachic obligations. I imagine this guy takes a long time for his davening. You know, when you're a servant, I got to go daven shachris. You know, and the guy goes, "Oh, it's a nice long shachris over there." Well, all of a sudden he's saying some extra tehillim and taking his sweet old time about it. But he's got all the obligations. On the other hand, you've taken on servitude to somebody other than God. Additional servitude. For that you get paid. Your ear heard God said, "Avodahem," they're my servants, and you've taken on additional servitude. But why the door? Gentlemen, why the door? Why drilled into a door? Anybody got an idea?
Door moves a little?
Well, hopefully this one doesn't. Okay. It's not like his ears drilled to the door swinging back. Hey, get me off of here, will you? While he's moving, swinging around back and forth. Why? Any idea why would he drill? Why does it get drilled into a door specifically? Does it have to do with the mezuzah? What's that? Does it have anything to do with the mezuzah? No, the mezuzah just tells us that like the doorpost is standing position, the door, it's specifically, he's not drilled into the mezuzah. The mezuzah is the doorpost. And it's just telling us the doorpost standing up, so the door also has to be in an upright position. But why a door? What's the idea of a door here? There's several ideas here. Several ideas what a door represents. One of them is that this guy believes that the door why does he want to stay? Why would he want to stay on as for all this time? The master is supporting him, and if he's got a wife and children supporting him, he's got a wife and children because he's married to this Canaanite woman also. So he's in a situation where he doesn't have to pay bills. He doesn't have to he has zero responsibility, and he's being supported. All he's got to do is work, but he doesn't have any, it's like living on kibbutz, right? All you got to do is work, and you're being supported around you. He believes, at some level, he may very well believe, that he can't make it on his own. He believes the door to parnasa, the door to a livelihood, is closed to him. Otherwise, you'd be willing to go out on your own. He believes the door. He said, I can't make it. And the Torah is telling you, listen, that's a lack of faith. Go out and work for a living like everybody else. There's a God in the world, and God will help you, number one. Number two, when he was stealing, he probably broke doors down. He broke doors down how did you get into the house? Well, there was probably a break-in entry. You probably broke in. Number three, I saw very interesting. One of the commentaries says, what happens if the guy let's say he runs away. Let's say he runs away from the master. At some point he says, listen, I've had about enough. He runs away. How do we identify that he was truly this guy's, what's it called, the indentured slave? How do you, well, there's only one guy who's got a door where there's a hole in the door exactly at ear level. So we bring him over and put him up against the door. Yeah, that's him, right? That's the guy. And not only that, it prevents the master from claiming someone else's slave. Two Jews are coming over claiming a slave and saying, hey, he's my slave. I'm the one who drilled him. Oh yeah, take him up to the door. Let's see where the ear comes up to the door. Okay, now I'm going to hit you with one that you're going to be a little bit surprised about, possibly upset, but then you'll see again how the Torah is very practical. Take a look at Pasuk Zayin. V'chiyimkor ishes bito la'oma. When a man sells his daughter as a maidservant. Lo seitze ketzei sa'avadim. Anything bother you about that? Nothing bother you about?
The whole thing?
Anything about that at all? Just those very words. When a man sells his daughter. Nothing bother you about that?
Everything.
Everything?
Yeah.
Which part?
The man selling his daughter
As a maidservant?
Yeah.
Why does it bother you?
It seems like a bad thing to do.
It seems like a bit, which part? To sell your daughter. Anybody want to buy my daughter? So we're talking about a girl who's a minor. When she's adult, you can't marry. When she's a nar, you can't sell her. Talk about a girl who's a minor. I once said this to my daughter. My daughter was giving me a hard time. She's about 7 years old. And she'd give me some lip. Esther Leah. She'd give me some lip. So at a certain point I said, do you know according to halacha I could sell you if I wanted to? And she looked at me with her hands on her. She goes, yeah, but you won't. Which wasn't in the script. She was supposed to throw herself down and plead and grovel at my feet. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I married her off. I told you every time my son-in-law turns his back on me, you got her. So why? The Torah says if a man was okay. So what? What are we talking about? What's it called? Child dealing in children. What's going on here? The answer is anytime the Torah says something, why would a guy sell his daughter? Remember, when the Torah says you can't do something, you always ask yourself why you would want to do it. The Torah says you're not allowed to worship idols. Why would I want to? There's obviously a reason why people would want to worship idols. If the Torah says you're allowed to sell your daughter, why? Why would I sell my daughter that the Torah is allowing me to do something which runs against all of our instincts? The answer is, what kind of father would sell a daughter? Only if you're so destitute that you can't support her. Well, now, what's the best thing for her at this point? You can't even feed her. What's the best thing for her? You sell her to a master who ideally will then either marry her or have his son marry her. Well, what's the best thing for your daughter? It's not the Torah talking about two guys after shul. Oh, by the way, you got a tip on the market. Two guys are schmoozing about the stock market. Says, yeah, my daughter's for sale if you want. Yeah, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a guy who's got to the point where he has no choice. He wants his daughter to be fed. It's a better thing. The best thing for her is to go and to sell her. And there are the rules over it. She's going to get out. She's going to get out by the time she's an adult. She's not going to stay there for too long. In the meantime, you're giving her, it's almost what we call nowadays, you're giving her to a foster family. It's because it's for her benefit, not because you stop selling her. It's for her benefit. So the Torah allows such a thing. Okay, this I told you, the Torah sounds, a lot of things sound strange, but here. Now what happens, let's say the guy marries her. The guy wants to marry her, or he marries her off to a son. So on Pasuk Yud, page 418, 2 lines from the bottom. Ima acheres yikach lo. Let's say the son marries her, then he marries another woman. Now, he may think, well, listen, I married the servant girl. She's second-rate wife. She's Jewish. And a man's allowed to marry a second. He thinks, well, she's second-rate because she was a servant girl. Says the Torah, She'era kesusa v'onasa lo yigra. He is not allowed to deprive her of either her clothing, her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. He's not allowed to deprive her. Now, gentlemen, we're always accused of being male chauvinists, and the Torah is chauvinistic, and so on and so forth. There are only 2 times in the Torah that the Torah mentions marriage obligations. And guess what? Both are the husband's. Torah mentions over here what the husband's marriage obligations are. It doesn't say a word about the wife's obligations. That the Gemara mentions the wife's obligations. But in the written Torah, you only find the husband's obligations. Her food, clothing, marital rights, that's the husband's obligation. And then later on in the Torah it says that when a man gets married, the first year, v'simach es ishto, he must gladden his wife. Doesn't say she's got to gladden him. It says he's got to gladden her. Twice in the Torah it mentioned, both times the obligation is the husband. Even more than that. If a woman is working, they had a woman in Chicago once, I remember years ago, the woman won a lottery. She won, I think, about $5 million. So they interviewed her on TV. So the guy says to her, well, Mrs. Brown, is there something you'd like to say? So she looks at the camera, she goes, yes, I would. Sears, Roebuck and Company, I quit. Right? She just won $5 million. A woman who's married, a Jewish woman who's married and is working, anytime she wants, she could come home and say to her husband, I got some good news and I got some bad news. The good news is you're going to be seeing more of me around here. The bad news is, well, the husband may say, and the bad news is I'm going to be seeing more of you around here. No. And she says, the bad news is I quit my job. And the husband has zero halachic recourse. How do you like that? She has zero obligation to work. A man who comes home and says to his wife, I got some good news and I got some bad news. A man does not have that halachic recourse. And there was a time and period we can't. There was a period in there was a period in time. Sorry, there was a period in time we don't have that. We're not allowed to do it nowadays. If a man refused to work to support his family, Beis Din would apply physical therapy, and he would have to work. How do you like that? You took a stick or a whip, and then you spoke to the guy a language that he understands. You call him over, hey, Zalman, you plan on working today? No, I don't think so. No kidding, Zal. You want to think about that again? Oh, yeah, work, my favorite. Yeah, work, here we go. Yeah, they're playing around over it. Oh, the guy just quit and let his family, they're gonna starve to death. No, you got to work. You gave her a ksuba. Gentlemen, you give a ksuba to a wife under the chuppah, you get married. What do you think the ksuba says? Oh, I love you. Hey, what are your financial obligations? Get to work, buddy. Nowadays, people say, yeah, but nowadays the women work. They do. The women work, and the husbands learn in kolol, and many wives work. But that's by choice, because they've chosen, they want husbands who are going to learn Torah full time. That's their choice. Sometimes a couple in a good marriage, the couple realizes that the wife needs to work because that's the financial reality of the 21st century, that you need two salaries in the house. But she does not have an out-and-out obligation. You have to understand that. She is not obligated according to halacha. The obligation is squarely on the shoulders of the husband. That the feminists never complain about. Okay, take a look at Pasuk Yud Tes. Torah talks about, in Parshat Mishpatim, by the way, you got all sorts of laws. Also, the Torah talks about hitting parents, not that that could ever happen in our day and age. On Perek Tesvav, on 420, 5 lines from the top. Umake avi v'imo mos yumas. Somebody who slugs his father or his mother is liable for the death penalty. If he hits his father or his mother, specifically if you draw blood. Even to go, I remember Buddy Ryan. Buddy Ryan was the coach of the Bears when they won the championship. Then he became the coach of the Eagles, and they didn't. And that felt good. You have no idea how good that. I wasn't even planning that. So he was the famous coach who designed the 4-6, the 46 defense when the Bears '85 won the Super Bowl. And so Buddy Ryan, I remember reading. He was tough, and he was. They had a boxing ring, and they would box. Him and his brothers would box. I mean, they made a ring in the backyard. They would be hitting each other. And his father was in the military, and Buddy Ryan apparently, was a teenager at the time. He was boxing, and apparently he was getting a little too big for his britches. And his father came home one day, and said, "Let's box." And he went into the ring with him. So he said his father jumped up, landed right on his feet, pinning him to the ground, and then just beat him to a pulp, which is, my father and I, we played chess, but I guess that's how some people play. Now, to hit your father under those circumstances is very dangerous. To go and hit your father if you draw blood or bruise him, so that if it's done intentionally, bleeding or bruising is liable for the death penalty if there are witnesses. That's why, according to halacha, a son ideally should, if he's a doctor, should not give his parents injections. That's brought down halachically. The Gemara talks about one of the Amoraim who didn't want his son to remove a splinter, because when you remove a splinter, you could draw blood. And I think it's brought down in the name of the Vilna Gaon that even a baby, a 1-year-old baby, sometimes babies all of a sudden they give you a scratch. You're holding the baby, and all of a sudden the baby, just give you a scratch or something. They could all of a sudden and draw blood. The Vilna Gaon says that somebody who as a baby scratched his father, when he becomes an adult, he should do tshuva for that. Now, obviously, he's not liable for it, but at some spiritual level, it's a good idea for him to do tshuva. So the Torah says somebody who hits his parents, and therefore, if the father, from a halachic point of view, if the father needs an injection or medical treatment, and he says, I want my son to do it, there is room for leniency. A father who's, let's say, needs an injection, let's say he's a diabetic and needs an injection, there's nobody else to give it to him, then for sure the son has to do it. But ideally, it shouldn't be done. It should be done by somebody else because of the severity of this halacha. Okay, take a look at Pasuk Yud Tes. Then the Torah talks about two guys who are fighting, and somebody hits him with a stone, or he hits him, and the guy does not die. If you hit somebody with a stone and he dies, then you're a murderer. But let's say you hit somebody. So the Torah says, Im Yakum, 3 lines from the bottom. V'hi salech b'chutz al mishanto. Let's say the guy recovers, and he ends up, you hit him with a stone or you hit him with a fist. By the way, it happens. You punch somebody. What happens in halach if you punch somebody? So you hurt him. V'nika hamakeh, he doesn't die. Rak shivto yitain, you have to pay the bills. If you've, what's it called when somebody can't go to work anymore? Compensation for workman's comp, that sort of thing. There's a halachic workman. I told you, the Torah is very practical. The guy is a professional of something or other. Let's say he's a professional musician, and you punched him and broke his fingers, so now he can't play the piano. So you have to pay for what there are ways to calculate pain. There are ways to calculate financial loss, pain that you've inflicted. There are ways to calculate how much is that pain worth. Virapo yirape, and you got to pay his medical bills. Now here the Torah says, the Gemara says, what do we learn from virapo yirape? Mikan, from here we see that a doctor has permission to heal people. Why would you think not? Sometimes
the healing process results in them experiencing more harm.
You mean the doctor could mess up?
No, it's like just the process of removing a splinter is going to
cause more pain.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you ask the average person, still would rather have the cure, even if it causes more pain, if it's going to extend his life. Why does the Torah need to give a doctor permission? Why does the Torah need to give a doctor permission? What do you say?
Maybe so that we don't confuse a doctor's role with the role of God. Like, so when we become Christian scientists, basically.
Why? What do the Christian scientists do?
They don't go to doctors. They just pray to Yoshki. They're not allowed to go to doctors.
They're not allowed to go to doctors. Okay. So we might have thought, not because of Christian scientists, but we might have thought that, well, if God brought a disease, so God doesn't want people interfering with what He's doing. If somebody got sick, He obviously got so. That the Torah says, no, God brought the disease. You're supposed to think about why, but you also have the right to go to a doctor, and doctor has a right to cure you. Now, but 1 second. First of all, the double terminology, Toso says in Baba Kama, virapo yirape, you might have thought that you could only go to a doctor to cure you from something that was inflicted by another human being. Let's say somebody Reuven punched Shimon, so now Shimon could go to the doctor, because anyway it was inflicted, the whole trouble started with the human being. Says Tosos, the double terminology is telling you that even a disease, which obviously didn't come from a human being, that you're allowed to go to a doctor too. Now, there is a dispute here between the Ramban Nachmanides and the Rambam. The Ramban says, ideally, you shouldn't be going to doctors. Ideally, a doctor could cure, but ideally, somebody who's God-fearing should really have enough faith to daven to Hashem and not have to go to a doctor. That's what the Ramban says. The Rambam says no. The Rambam says, if a person's not well, they should go to a doctor, and that's how we paskin. If a person is not well, we are not, maybe there are people who are somewhere, somehow, but most of us are not on the level that we have such faith that we can, maybe we're chicken. Sometimes people don't want to go to a doctor. Sometimes people don't want to go to a doctor because they're afraid of what the diagnosis is going to be. But a responsible Jew, responsibility is you go to a doctor. And then you daven. You daven before you go to the doctor, and you daven after you've been to the doctor. But we go to doctors if a person is in pain or if a person has an illness, you go to a doctor. That is responsible. That's what the Torah says you do. And then you follow the doctor's directions. To go to a doctor, again, we're talking about a responsible, qualified doctor. But if a responsible, qualified doctor tells a person to do something, many Gedolim, when they were told by a doctor, they followed a doctor's instructions to the letter. If the doctor said you have to walk for 20 minutes a day, they walked 20 minutes a day. If the doctor says that you have to stop eating certain foods, they would stop eating those foods. But because we're not playing around. That's why did you go to the doctor? You went to the doctor because the Torah says you have to go to a doctor. For a person to fake, for a person to say, no, I have faith, don't confuse, as Rabbi Gottlieb said, don't confuse trust in God with irresponsibility. Sometimes people say, I trust Hashem. No, you don't. You're just irresponsible. You don't feel like going, you don't feel like paying. And a person has an obligation to go to doctors and to behave responsibly. And we're not, if theoretically there's somebody who's on such a high level of faith, that's something else. But I don't know about you. Most of us, I can only speak for myself, don't feel well. Go to the doctor. And then ask the doctor for the most powerful narcotics he's got. They'll at least get something out of the deal. I did say I was joking. All right, we'll continue tomorrow.